Hello, good evening, good morning, good afternoon. Some good news and bad news. The good news is SADC has finally decided that they're not going to sweep the rigged elections in Zimbabwe and grant Zanu PF political legitimacy. That is good news because there's been some political machinations, particularly by South Africa, which raised a really serious concern that the ANC government in South Africa seemed to have been keen to water down the SADC and the AU reports that condemned the recent elections in Zimbabwe as being flawed and illegal, and therefore then failed to produce a legitimate government. So this development is really interesting in that regard. So it looks like South Africa's machination has come to nothing. The bad news is that SADC is negotiating with Zanu PF. And they have given Zanu PF 3 options. I think we'll listen to the options first, and then I can give you my take of those options.
From the strategic tracker leadership, of course, yes, it is from one of the diplomats in SADC, and she said that the SADC has given Zanu PF a list of options to consider before it is sanctioned and summoned by regional entities. Of course, yes, ladies and gentlemen, this issue of SADC against the state of Zimbabwe, against the government of Zimbabwe, is continuing, and it seems as if SADC is still seized with resolving the matter of the Zimbabwean elections. Yes, this has given hope to the people of Zimbabwe who were losing hope according to the passage of time, but they have been reminded that in 2008, the GNU or the talks began only about 2 to 3 months after the election, and some of the government ministers actually come into effect in 2009. So this is what is happening. The SADC is giving Zanu PF 3 options. They have drafted to them and sent them send them 3 options to consider. They have also sent the same options to Nelson Chamisa. They have also sent these options even to the civic society organizations and all interested parties in this issue, as they are trying to map a way forward, as they are trying to resolve the Zimbabwean crisis caused by the disputed election of 23 to 24 August 2023. So the first option that SADC gave Zanu PF to consider is a new election that is run by either SADC or the United Nations or both. Of course, yes, ladies and gentlemen, we saw that SADC has said that it does not supervise elections in its member countries, but what we are saying is that they expect a body that is created for the sole purpose of managing this election. And this body will be constituted with members from the SADC, members from the United Nations, and also local bodies, including the civil society organizations. And the second option that the SADC gave to Zanu PF was a transitional authority that is constitution of Zanu, CCC, civil society, and churches to reform the electoral laws and subsequently run elections. Of course, yes, so that advocate Nelson Chamisa also mentioned about the transitional authority in his recent rally. So it is said that the SADC is saying Zimbabwe will need a transitional authority that will be that will be hell-bent on improving the electoral laws of the country, on reforming the electoral laws. Of course, yes, we have witnessed that there hasn't been much in reforming electoral laws in Zimbabwe ever since the opposition came into being. But now the SADC is saying that they need a transitional authority that will include the government, the opposition, and the civil society organizations, as well as churches, to spearhead the reform process of electoral laws in the country. Then the third option is going to be a GNU that is consisting of parties in party to run until the next election and fixing laws in the process. So this is the third option, which is a government of national unity. As we saw how a government of national unity came into being in 2008 and how
I think we'll stop there. So let's consider the three options. The number one option is that there will be fresh elections organized and run by SADC and maybe with the help of the United Nations. This option is completely out of the question because it doesn't address the fundamental weaknesses in the Zimbabwe political system right now. We are in this situation because Zanu PF failed and the opposition failed to deliver free, fair, and credible elections. Zimbabwe has failed to hold free, fair, and credible elections ever since the country's independence in 1980. The country had the golden opportunity to implement those democratic reforms during the government of national unity of 2008 to 2013. Not even one token reform was implemented, and hence we are where we are today. So yes, we can have outsiders to supervise the elections. Whichever government comes out of it, we know it is not going to implement any meaningful reforms. So we will be back where we started. I think this issue of quickly having fresh elections is not going to solve anything. I think we need to sit down now and sort out this problem of rigged elections once and once for all. So this fresh elections is completely out. The second option is a national transition authority, which will be composed of Zanu PF, CCC, and other members of technocrats or civic society. They haven't spelled out how long the transition authority has and what powers it will have and what relationship it will have with the present government. But even if that National Transition Authority was given total autonomy, there is still a weakness there. If Zanu PF and CCC are key players in that National Transition Authority, how can we have confidence that they will be willing to implement any meaningful reforms? They did not implement any meaningful reforms in the past. And to ask them to be in the National Transition Authority, for what end and purpose if they failed to implement any meaningful reforms in the past? I've said before that Zanu PF and CCC are no longer the solution because they are the problem. And to think that a problem can still be a solution is absolutely ridiculous. We are in a crisis. And I think this is when the nation has got to stand up firm and say, no, let's solve this problem. Let's deal with this problem instead of keeping on kicking the can down the road. Let's consider the third option. The third option is the two parties in government right now, that's Zanu PF and CCC, suppose with the same number of MPs they've got as they've got right now, will go in and form the government of national unity. And they will be tasked to implement the democratic reforms. I think it's even worse than the second option. At least the second option had some technocrats who can say, no, this needs to be changed. This time we are giving the same individuals who failed to implement even one token reform during the last GNU another chance, another 5 years to do nothing. Who is to say to them what reforms are required? Mnangagwa is adamant that the elections were free, fair, and credible. Chamisa has been participating in these elections, forever complaining that they are rigged, but always participating out of greed. I think the third option is completely out. I think one of the things that I find ridiculous about this is that we are treating the people who failed the nation, landed that into this crisis, first in 2008, and now again, a repeat. And we are still saying to them, you are the only ones who can solve the problem. This is ridiculous. I think SADC is loath to take on Zanu PF because we all know that Zanu PF can make the country ungovernable. And so they want to give Zanu PF a role. But I think this is what is at the heart of our problem. Zanu PF has held the nation to ransom for 43 years. And if we are serious about getting the nation finally freed of this situation, we have got to tackle Zanu PF. They rigged these last elections, and they were hoping that they'll get away with it. SADC and the AU have done the people of Zimbabwe a great service by standing up and saying, no, these elections are not free, fair, and credible. And I think we need to sit down with Zanu PF and say, no, listen, you failed to hold free, fair, and credible elections. Let's get this issue sorted out. And therefore, then I suggest there should be a fourth option. And the fourth option should be a national transition authority composed of the technocrats who understand what the reforms are all about and who will implement all the democratic reforms. They do not need to have to negotiate at every turn with the individuals whose primary purpose is to throw the spanner in the works. Let's get this one right. Zanu PF should not be the one dictating to the country, to the nation, what is to be done here. They are the ones who got us into this mess. And now we are saying to them, okay, tell us what solution you would want. I think this is the most ridiculous proposal one can expect. Zanu PF is the one that got us into this mess. And their friends, Triple C. To even suggest that they should be given a role in the National Transition Authority is outrageous. Are we rewarding them for getting us into this mess? They were in the last GNU and they failed to implement even one meaningful democratic reform. And hence the reason why the country is still in this mess. I think we need to bite the bullet. We need to confront Zanu PF. If SADC feels that it's not up to the task to take Zanu PF head on, then I think they should consult the UN and get the UN involved in these negotiations. Get the UN involved in deciding what options the nation should be presented and what say people like Mnangagwa and this Zanu PF, Chamisa and this Triple C should have in that. The number one priority, as far as I'm concerned, should be to get the democratic reforms finally implemented so that Zimbabwe from now on will hold free, fair, and credible elections. Zanu PF, Triple C, they can all participate in the future elections. But let's get the groundwork done. Let's get the country to implement the reforms so that there are free, fair, and credible elections. And this issue of focusing on electoral laws, I think completely misses the point. Zimbabwe should be looking at reforming everything that needs to be done. Most of the country's institutions have been corrupted. They are Zanu PF in all but name. They need to be reformed. Even the constitution itself needs to be changed. There is a lot of work to be done here if we are going to get Zimbabwe back on a democratic footing. And I think we should take the matter with the seriousness and agency it demands. We cannot afford to miss this chance again because we may not get another chance for a generation or more. Zanu PF should not be allowed to hold the nation to ransom. Nor Triple C be allowed to hold the nation to ransom, particularly when they are the ones who got the nation into this mess. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. I think SADC should have seriously looked at, we were involved in the last GNU arrangement in Zimbabwe, and it did not work out. For the record, I believe if there had been political will, particularly on the part of the MDC, they would have implemented a number of reforms and got the country back on some democratic footing. The political will was not there. And as for the Zanu PF definitely did not want to reform itself out of power. And I don't think they still want to do that now. We have learned a lot from that GNU. But the number one thing we should have learned is that Zanu PF and Triple C cannot be trusted to implement all the democratic reforms. We are now not talking just of let's implement some. No, we should implement all of them, all the democratic reforms, and get Zimbabwe on a democratic footing. Because whoever will get into power will not be implementing any reforms. Because by the very nature of these reforms is that they favor the incumbent. And so whoever gets into power will be looking at, well, the flaws and illegalities favor me, my staying in power a bit longer. So the incentive to implement reform will not be there. For Christ's sake, let's get this one right. There should be a fourth option here. And that fourth option should be a national transition authority composed entirely of technocrats with SADC expertise and UN expertise in it to implement the democratic reforms and get Zimbabwe back on a democratic footing. The last thing we want is to appoint Zanu PF and CCC for no other reason other than to appease the leaders of those two parties. Are we going to again risk the country failing to get back on a democratic footing for the sake of appeasing the very people who, for the last 43 years and 23 years, respectively, for ZANU and CCC, have failed the nation again and again and again? I don't think we really want to do that. No one has the divine right to govern Zimbabwe. The most important thing that this opportunity is giving us is to restore the right of every Zimbabwean to have a meaningful say in the governance of the country. To restore the belief that no one is above the law. That is what is at stake here. And if we're going to hope to achieve that, we have got to be bold enough to say no one is going to hold the nation to account, to ransom. If we're going to start this important exercise by compromising to the point of making the bodies utterly useless, I think it will be the biggest mistake we can make here. The problem with picking which one of the three would be the worst option is that you're already accepting, you're starting with a compromise. The second option of the National Transition Authority, where Zanu PF and CCC will be in there to throw the spanner in the works at every turn, will probably be the least damaging one. The first one of having immediate elections without any reforms is completely out because there will never be reforms implemented in future. The third one, the two parties in power and asking them to implement reforms, I think is just asking for too much. Or it'll be just a carry on from the last GNU, where they share power and nothing is ever done. So the third option, the second option, which is this National Transition Authority, will probably be the least of the three evils. But that has got a serious problem in the sense that we can all be certain of one thing. Zanu PF and CCC would only be in a hurry to get that National Transition Authority finished so that they could get back into power and do what they please. So that National Transition Authority would be hurried along at every turn by the two parties that do not want the National Transition Authority in the first place. I believe the two parties, none of them would want the National Transition Authority. If they're asked to choose, I should imagine that they would want, at least Mnangagwa would want the third option, where he remains in power. And instead of it being called a Zanu PF government, it's just given another name, Government of National Unity. But he will have majority in it, and all his MPs will still hold their positions, and it will be back business as normal. He will hold the presidency. So I think that will be the option that he would want. CCC, I should imagine they would want fresh elections as quickly as possible. Now that they've got Zanu PF embarrassed, they stand a better chance of performing even better in the fresh elections. How will that government benefit the country? I don't think it will benefit the country that much. We will still have a situation where as soon as the government, the elections are over, we still have institutions like the army, the civil service, which will remain faithful to Zanu PF. The judiciary and so forth will remain faithful to Zanu PF. And we will only be working to ensure that Zanu PF gets back into power as quickly as possible. And the elections, the next elections, ZEC will be back to supervise them. Or are we looking at asking SADC to do the same again? I think we should fix the problem. Let's deal with the problem. Let's implement the reforms and not just keep on kicking the can down the road. The first option is doing absolutely not implementing even one meaningful reform. The third option, they've got the option to implement reforms, but do you seriously trust the same people who failed to implement even one token reform during the last GNU will do so now? I think it's being unrealistic. The second option, both Zanu PF and CCC would not want it. And so that third group, third party, the third leg that will be in that National Transition Authority, who will be trying to push for reforms, will find themselves in a situation where the two parties are forever throwing the spanner in the works and trying to get the National Transition Authority's business completed as quickly as possible so that they could get back to normal, to business as usual. I do not believe the National Transition Authority, as being proposed in the three options, would deliver anything of value. I go back to my proposal. The fourth option should be a national transition authority appointed purely on merit and of people who will implement the reforms, who have shown that they know what they're talking about the reforms. And not in any way compromised by the presence of Zanu PF or CCC. We made that mistake last GNU. We don't want to make it again. Zanu PF should not be allowed to hold the nation to ransom. Nor should CCC be allowed to do the same. I think SADC, this is too much for them to take on their own. SADC should seriously approach the UN. They did their best last time, it didn't work. Now they need to get the UN and get the UN's authority and backing in this matter. And the position should be very clear. Zimbabwe has the opportunity to finally implement the democratic reforms and get the nation back on track. That should be the number one priority. And no individual or party should be allowed to hold the nation to ransom on that issue. That should not be negotiable. It should not be for Zanu PF to decide what they want. On that one, that is not negotiable. Zanu PF and CCC got the country into this mess. Let's find a solution, a way out of it. And to suggest that the problem should become the solution as well is absolutely ridiculous and totally unacceptable. I'm glad that SADC have decided, and I believe that is the right decision, to be firm on this and say, no, we are not going to allow Zanu PF to get away with this one and rubber stamp the elections and declare them legitimate. They are illegitimate. The process was flawed. The process, the last election had so many illegalities in the process. Those things need to be sorted out. And we have got a second chance to sort them out. We will sort them out. I think SADC should not take the responsibility on its own. The three options that it has given both Zanu PF and CCC are totally unacceptable. And I'm glad that the details of this National Transition Authority have not been worked out. But even if they were to be accepted as the second option, when the details are being worked out, that National Transition Authority should not be compromised by parties whose only presence is to short-circuit the process. That should be at the heart of these discussions. Could never overemphasize that point. There must be a National Transition Authority, and it must have the authority to implement all the democratic reforms and get the nation on a democratic footing without compromising anything. We can't afford this cycle of rigged elections and bad governance anymore. So once again, I thank SADC for making the right decision to refuse to rubber stamp Zanu PF. But I also urge them to seriously consider that the option of allowing Zanu PF and CCC back into positions of power and authority for the sake of appeasing them is not in the interest of Zimbabwe. We need to have this problem sorted out, and we want it sorted out now. Thank you very much.